Steve, you have been shouting this from the rooftop for years. Now, everyone finally seems to agree that talent can be anywhere. Let's just say over the last year, how has the landscape changed in terms of what you've seen and where the most innovative companies are being born?
It reminds me of the early days of the internet and AOL. The first 10 years, we were talking about the idea of getting everybody online. Most people, frankly, were skeptical. And then finally, you kind of hit a tipping point, and what seemed sort of like a crazy idea suddenly became an obvious idea. And with the rise of the rest, I think it's similar. We've actually been working on this nearly a decade. I was asked by President Obama to chair the Startup America initiative about a decade ago. We started doing our Rise of the Rest bus tours, I think it was about six and a half years ago. And for much of that decade, people were saying, well, it seems like a nice idea, but do you really believe you can build great, iconic, valuable companies outside of Silicon Valley? And now people recognize you can't, partly because there have been some successful ones, but also, as you note, the pandemic has resulted in some people rethinking kind of where they want to live and where they can or want to work. And that has, I think, will have over time, a real impact in terms of this rise of the rest movement. More of these cities will rise up because people will recognize they have more flexibility than they might have thought they had even just a year ago.
So do you still see this happening in clusters, in cities where sort of new ecosystems are sprouting up, or is it more dispersed? Like, could it be happening anywhere?
It's a mix, and it really depends on the industry. There's certainly some remote work, and you've seen this now already, even pre-pandemic, taking hold. And if, as part of this infrastructure bill that likely is going to pass Congress, rural broadband is included, which it likely will be, that will fuel that and give people more flexibility. But for the most part, there's still something around clustering talent in cities. It just doesn't have to be a few cities like San Francisco, New York. It could be many cities. And our Rise of the Rest seed fund you mentioned, we've actually invested in 150 companies in 70 different cities. And with our Rise of the Rest bus tour, so far we visited 43, 44 different cities. And we're seeing things happening in all these different cities. It's really remarkable. It's not just a few places that are starting to show momentum as startup ecosystems. It's dozens of places. I think that bodes well for the innovation economy more broadly. I think it will allow entrepreneurs to be close to some of their customers, close to some of their partners in some of the sectors that are ripe for disruption, healthcare, food and ag, things like that. And over time, level the playing field. So again, Silicon Valley, as you well know, is terrific and will continue to be terrific. It's the leader of the pack and will continue to be the leader of the pack, but it's going to be less dominant in the next 10 or 20 years than it was in the last 10 or 20 years. This isn't a new idea. We've seen this in other industries. Half a century ago, if you wanted to be in the financial services world, you had to be in New York, you had to be on Wall Street. 50 years ago, if you wanted to be in the entertainment industry, you had to be in Hollywood. Now people recognize that if you want to be in either of those industries, you might choose to be in New York or choose to be in Los Angeles, but you don't have to be there. I think the same dynamic we'll see in the tech sector and the innovation economy. Silicon Valley will still have some advantages, but many other cities around the country will rise up and be terrific startup ecosystems.
So are there any that are rising up faster than the rest? I mean, we're hearing a lot about Miami. Where do you think the next Silicon Valley is going to be?
I think it will be a lot. It won't be just one or two. And I'm asked about that because we have worked in so many cities and invested in so many cities. It's almost like asking who's your favorite child. Of course, you never answer that question. I always duck what are the next cities. But we've seen a number of cities really rise up that really has shown momentum, including some larger cities that a decade ago weren't necessarily known as startup cities. Even Los Angeles 10 years ago, the entrepreneurs was hard to raise capital. Chicago was hard to raise capital. Washington, D.C., where I was been based, hard to raise capital. Those certainly have risen. One of the companies we backed through Revolution Growth in Chicago, Tempest, started 5 years ago. Now it's 1,600 employees, raised $1 billion. It's killing it. And that's a company in precision medicine, big data. People would assume would have to be in Silicon Valley or maybe in Boston, the Cambridge area. So we're seeing that dynamic. I give the mayor in Miami credit. He's certainly been a visible evangelist on behalf of his cities. More mayors are doing that. They recognize the future of their cities really are in the hands of startups, creating a lot of jobs and driving a lot of the opportunity in different parts of the country. But I think people are going to be surprised in the next 10 or 20 years how many of these cities rise and how many great, iconic, multi-billion-dollar unicorn companies are in parts of the country that most people, even today, don't really think of as startup cities.
Okay, just about 30 seconds left, Steve. Let's talk about what kinds of companies. What are your top three? What sectors are most promising? We're hearing so much about crypto these days. Where are you placing your bets?
Well, health tech is 1/6 of the economy. I mentioned Tempest in Chicago, another company we backed, Talkspace in the mental health space, actually in the process of going public now via SPAC. A lot of momentum there. Another company we backed, Clear, initially focused on airport fast passes, it pivoted. Also now has a health pass partnership they announced a couple weeks ago with Walmart. So that's a big area of continued focus. 1/6 of the economy. It's arguably the most important aspect of our lives. We're also seeing a lot around e-commerce. We're seeing a lot around the future of work in terms of how it likely will be more of a hybrid kind of work structure. So there are great ideas from great entrepreneurs everywhere. We're just trying to match the capital with those ideas so people have more flexibility in terms of where they want to start and scale those companies. I'm super excited by the progress that's been made in the last decade, and particularly sort of this tipping point we've seen over the past year bodes well for the future of America.